Okay, great. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our new participants, and thank you for everybody who's participated in our last session. It's nice to see you all again. We are going to be talking about exploring Indigenous history, resilience, and community with The People Shall Continue. So, for our agenda today, first we will introduce ourselves, and then I'm going to give a little bit of information about the history behind The People Shall Continue and the book the impact that this really critical book has had. Then we'll dive into exploring Indigenous history, resilience, and community, and then conclude with how to talk about The People Shall Continue in the classroom through a modern lens, and then also with Native American Heritage Month and Thanksgiving. And we'll also talk about the free teacher's guide. So I am Katie Potter. I'm the Senior Literacy Manager at Lee & Low Books. I develop the teacher's guides and educator resources such as professional development and webinar offerings. I also work with nonprofit organizations and university professors and schools across the country on incorporating diverse books into your respective educational programs.
Hi, I'm Elise. I am an editor with 2 books, an imprint of Lee & Low Books. We do the middle grade and YA novels. I'm also an author and a food scholar, studying about food and reclamation and restoration of foodways and things like that. So hello.
So if everyone could introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know where you're coming from, what you teach, and that way we can, it seems like everybody today is from all different kinds of grades, and The People Shall Continue can absolutely be used in any grade.
Mm-hmm.
Hi again to some of you who are still here with us from the Indian No More presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yay, so many coming from the nations. It's so good to have you all.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to move on to, I'm going to give a brief overview of The People Shall Continue. It was written by Acoma Pueblo poet Simon J. Ortiz, and it traces the history of Native and Indigenous peoples of North America from the time of creation to the present day. And this is really such an important book because it was really one of the first picture books to do that. A 32-page picture book, it provides the whole history of Native and Indigenous peoples of North America in a beautiful way through traditional Native oral storytelling. It's such a beautiful book, and I hope many of you have read it who are joining it with us today. It's also available in Spanish, and I think this is also really important to note that it's providing even more accessibility for our Spanish-speaking students. If you're in a bilingual or dual language setting, I encourage you to check it out, the Spanish version as well. So to give a history of this book, you can also read about it on our blog post that I'll provide on another slide about how this book came back into print, because we brought this book, it was out of print. And Lee & Low Books, we brought it back into print just in time for its 40th year anniversary. And so this book was originally published in 1977. And if you were with us in our Indian No More presentation, we talked about the termination era, which happened between 1953 and 1968. At the end of the termination era, I mean, it never really ended, but in 1968, when it technically ended through legalities, President Johnson gave a speech called The Forgotten Americans, and he proposed that, the previously terminated tribes, that the American government was going to reestablish relationships. Well, of course, it was incredibly fractured relationship to begin with, and the rebuilding took a long time, and it's still happening to this day. But anyway, the 1977 is really indicative of what was happening during that time period. when the rebuilding, the reconstruction, the reunification of families who were torn apart through the termination era. And it was a demonstration of solidarity. And this book really does talk about the power of community and coming together to move forward. And also 1970, not that Alcatraz happened during this time period, during in 1977 exactly, but it was near the time of the publication of the book, The Occupation of Alcatraz, when Native and Indigenous people occupied Alcatraz. And this was a protest that was incredibly powerful in demonstrating that Native and Indigenous people are here. We are here in this moment, in this time, and we are fighting for our identity, and we are fighting to restore our communities. Um, so, fast forward to when we brought this book back into print, Simon included information about the Dakota Access Pipeline in the back of the book. And basically Alcatraz was the DAPL of that time. And it's really just bringing awareness to two things, to fighting for Native and Indigenous rights, which of course is still going on today. So you can definitely read more in the back matter about the Standing Rock tribal community in the Dakota Access Pipeline, but it's really it just continues to show that this history is modern history. It's still happening to this day. The lives and lands of Sioux peoples and Native and Indigenous peoples around the world are threatened, and so we need to come together to bolster that, to provide community, to provide solidarity. Elise, did I forget anything?
You did great, Katie. You did great. I think Katie and I had so many wonderful conversations leading up to this event today. I think something that when we were talking about Alcatraz, if I can add a little moment there, is that, or when in this particular time in like the late 60s, early 70s, is kind of in a way, the way you think of, oh, the time around 1776, when this was like a historical period, when something, when we're establishing our independence in American history. This is kind of like the era and the time for Indigenous history, where we were kind of coming back and fighting and going, yeah, and like, staking our ground in a sense that was in a modern sense and modern today. So this is a very, very important time. So when you hold this book in your hand, it was published in that time, and it was published when all of this was going on. So it was very, very significant in that moment. So it's good to think of this modern history in this moment in this book.
Mhm.
I hope that helps.
So the impact that this book has had, it's really a timeless book, and it honors the history of Native and Indigenous peoples in a way that had never been done before. And really still to this day has not really been done in the way that Simon presents the history, like I said, through traditional Native oral storytelling. And it's just, like Elise said, with the timing of the original publication and also the timing of when we brought it back into print for the 40th year anniversary, those are all different elements that you can tie into the teaching of this book. Elise is going to talk a little bit more about her own personal experience with reading this book. But it's just, when you read with it, when you engage with it with students, you can see the transformative power that this book has in conveying accurate, honest Native history. And it shows that this history it's still ongoing. When Simon talks about in the back matter that Native and Indigenous peoples are still fighting for their sovereignty, for their rights. So this book is just a way to tie that all in together. Elise, did you want to add anything else to that? Or you will in a little bit.
Yeah, it was great.
So with some of the brief history, about Alcatraz, about the termination era, about the original publication date, and then Dakota Access Pipeline today. Where would you teach this in your curriculum? We had such a wonderful engaged chat in the Indian No More when people were answering this question. And I think you can all, we're all learning from each other, and we can take our ideas, other people's ideas back into our respective settings and utilize them. So please let us know where you would teach this in your curriculum. And if you have taught this already and how you've done it. I think that's also important too. Oh, Simon Ortiz's book From Sand Creek.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Civil rights era.
Mhm. We did have a thing called Red Power back then that a lot of people might not know about. Like Black Power, we had Red Power.
Mm-hmm. Making sure to share stories and books from.
Mhm. The book does cover, like, it does mention the stolen generations, talking about boarding schools.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
was still going on at this time.
Yeah. And I think it's really important with this book, and we'll talk about the teacher's guide in a little bit, but to prepare yourself, because this book is unique in that it's not like a traditional, it doesn't present in a Native and Indigenous history that you would see in a traditional social studies textbook. So I think it's important to really know that background history and be ready to engage with students who have complex questions about the content that's presented in the book.
I just saw someone that was talking about the tinglet. I know them. Sorry if I don't say that properly, but how when we're in one particular area, how we can become centered about the Indigenous nations wherever we are, which is great to know where you are and what's going on. But I know that when I've spoken with folks up in Alaska, and we have to share in our Indigenous cultures as well. Oh, how do you do this? What do you teach about that? They ask me about what it was like for me growing up. We have different experiences, and we're in this sharing process. So one of the things that this book's been great for is to be able to open up the breadth of that culture, of different places that we've come from, what we as individual nations have kind of brought to the table together. So it's a great book for that.
Mm-hmm. I saw someone comment about when the Shadbush blooms. So that is another native title written by Lenape author Carla Messinger, who I strongly encourage you to watch the webinar that I did with Carla Messinger and Tracy Sorrell back in the fall of 2020 about contemporary Native children's literature. I wish I wasn't sharing my screen so I could throw it in the chat. But anyway, if you go on our website and you look up webinars, I strongly encourage you to watch it. But when the Shadbush Blooms was another native out of print title, and a teacher in 2017 or 2018 or 2019, a very close colleague of ours who was a teacher brought it to our attention that he had taught with When the Shadbush Blooms, and he could not get it anymore because it was out of print. And we, as a publisher at Lee and Low Books, a lot of times we have brought books back into print if everything looks good. But of course it's complicated with the rights, but this was a really important native title that's, like People Shall Continue, presents a past and present native history simultaneously. What's beautiful about When the Shadbush Blooms, sorry to go off on a tangent, I'll be done in like 2 seconds, but I think it's really,
Great, it was great.
text. It is one of my favorite picture books. One of my favorite picture books of all time, because it has the same text, but on the spread, you have an illustration in the past and then an illustration in the present within a Lenape family. So this is such a wonderful book that you can use with elementary students. The Thank you, Renee, for putting it in the chat.
Yes, thank you. Hmm.
Really, really wonderful ideas. Definitely could use it in 8th grade. Absolutely. Student, an orange shirt day video about orange shirt day. Definitely. Yes, one child responded that he wished he were not white because white people did bad things. It brought up a new conversation I hadn't expected. The people shall continue can absolutely bring up those conversations as well. I tutored a student who was, I read this book with her and she asked me, is this fiction? So students will be asking these kinds of questions when you read this book and being equipped with the background knowledge and context. Our children are incredible teachers. They have messages that will guide adults. I think it's,
I want to just emphasize expanding upon what Katie just said about that they will get questions but I also want to say that one of the things that, and I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly, but that this book fills a lot of gaps in history that gets left out, and it does so in such a poetic and refined way. And that's something that I have really appreciated, because I remember just thinking, nobody ever talks about this, nobody knows about this, and this just really covers everything in such a beautiful, deft way. It's very fulfilling as an Indigenous person to read it.
Yeah, Elise, so now if you could, let us know about how this book presents Indigenous history, resilience, and community, and how those themes are pervasive in the text.
What I would like to do before I dive into all of this is I just want to give a little bit of personal history about this book. I'm a middle-aged woman, and this was one of the first books that I saw as a child in a library where I saw myself and saw our history actually spoken and said in a book with art that resonated with me. There were a few other Indigenous books at the time that did this, but this one really hit me so powerfully when I was a child, because I felt very, very seen. And of course, books go out of print, things happen over the years. So when Leigh Low said that they were going to bring this book back in its 40th anniversary after so many years, Cheryl Klein at the time said, I have got a copy here for you. And I went into the office and I was holding it in my hands and going through it. And the memories that were coming up for me of the first time I had seen this book was just so powerful. And I sat there just standing in front of her, looking at this book, very quietly taking this in and not saying anything. And Cheryl's just kind of waiting for me there as I went through it, but it meant so much to me, and that Leigh Low brought this book back in such a tangible, real way. So even today, it resonates with me in that same way. And there's so many Indigenous people here in this workshop today, and I'm very curious about if you had any of that experience reading this coming through as a child, but. So this is a personal book for me, even though I didn't read it, or that I'm not Pueblo. I'm a Cherokee woman, and so I'm so grateful for my Pueblo cousins out there, and for Simon, who put this together in such an amazing way to speak for us in such a beautiful way. One of the things that this book was also the beginning of what I would say that I was able in my generation to grow up what I call a loud and proud Indian. I was able to say, yes, this is my culture, this is my identity, this is who I am, this is my family is, and to claim that for myself, and being able to do that. in my mom's generation and before, it was about how do we not be attacked? How do we survive and like maintain ourselves? How do we blend and not be oppressed? There was all of this pressure, of that. And in the late 60s, early 70s, there was just this movement where we were saying, no, we won't be silenced anymore. I got to grow up in that movement, to be able to grow up to not be silenced. And that is such an amazing thing, to be able to be a loud and proud India today. And I see Indigenous youth coming up, proud of who they are. I just saw a beautiful Indigenous model on the cover of Allure magazine the other day, and I said, woohoo, yay, represent. So, we are here, and this book still does that. It shows that resilience of Indigenous people, and I'm so grateful to my ancestors, to my family, and to my community to be able to be that loud and proud. And I want kids to be able to be loud and proud too as they're coming up. This is very important. Since we've always been thought of in a historical framework, I think it's really important to bring about books and things in the classroom that do land us solidly in modern history, from, not in the 1800s, but in the 20th and 21st century, and that we are still here. We are still doing cool, amazing things. That was a lot to say. That was very personal for me. Another thing that was really important for us, and that's done so well in this book, is about how it expresses the solidarity between Indigenous people and other marginalized communities. I know that my principal chief woman man killer, when she was alive and she was still our chief, solidarity was definitely something that was important to her, especially among women, having solidarity with other women of the time and women's rights and women's issues. And this book also talks about that solidarity and brings that conversation in. I also think some of the history that gets forgotten is not just the history of, for example, there is not just one Trail of Tears. There are many trails that happened all over North America. So we can talk about what those migrations were. It's not just one Trail of Tears with my nation. There was many, many of them. But what we don't get is what was the ingenuity that Indigenous people had, that have had since time immemorial. For example, we traded with one another. We had trade routes. We had a sign language in that trade so we can kind of communicate with each other because we had all different languages. We knew how to, for example, we knew how to do burns, right, within forests to be able to create good ecology in order so that animals will come in, that we could hunt, that they're being fed, that the trees are taken care of, being able to think about this, this community, I guess, or would be a good way to put it, of nature and how we're all kind of in with each other. We're all part of one another. And we understood how to nurture that community, both the people and the earth. So we have so much knowledge to give, so much ingenuity to give. The way we fished is now being seen by sustainable fishermen going, oh, those Indigenous ways actually is the most sustainable way. We have women that are taking seaweed and that they had done for generations before, and how to use that to fertilize crops. These are all ancient knowledge that we have to give. I think that's what's so great about this, is very definitely that it says, it kind of touches upon the things that we did. One brought this in trade, one brought that from different regions. We've had such a narrow idea of Indigenous people. To be able to expand upon that is better. And to illustrate what that narrow idea is I like to bring up brands. Indigenous people for many years have been just seen visually as a brand. We're on the on a cornmeal package, or we're I'm so ready for Jeep Cherokee to end, let me tell you, to just see these brands put together of what's an American thing, yet we don't see the people. One of the most wonderful exhibits at the American Indian Museum at the Smithsonian is called Americans, to be able to go in and see all these brands, see all that's happening, the way it's just been disseminated to so much of it, but we're not seeing the people. We're not seeing the people, and we're not seeing the nations. And so we've just been sidelined to mascots and brands. And there's so much more to us. There's so much more breadth in what we've contributed. So I think it's important to look within your own community, your own Indigenous communities around you, to see what it is that they have contributed in your space. And that's great for you as educators and for kids to kind of learn what that is, bringing in that kind of modern sense. Show the cover of the Allure magazine. Look, isn't she great? If that's what you want to do. But we are here, and we are present, and we continue to contribute. One of the things I mentioned before in our last session was that per capita, Native Americans join the military more than any other group of people in the US. So right now you have a ton of Native Americans in our American military, protecting our lands and protecting us. And so we contribute now to things. I think that's just really important to understand. And finally, I think it's good to understand that we have a lot of knowledge to give when it comes to about ecology. Someone mentioned, I think earlier, someone mentioned Braiding Sweetgrass by the botanist. It's a wonderful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that gives kind of more of an Indigenous perspective of how we view nature, how we view growing things, the approach that we take to it. There's just so much to learn from that. And what's so great about Robin Kimmerer, the author who wrote this, was that she is also a scientist, and she's showing that connection together between Indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge. So these are a lot of big, giant topics, and so much that I've mentioned to you. And Simon, I'm so jealous of you, because you're able to kind of put all of those themes into this one picture book that I read as a child. And I'm so grateful, so very grateful for that. And I know that a lot of us would like that we get so used to waiting for Native American Heritage Month, or waiting for Thanksgiving to be able to talk about Indigenous things. It's so easy to slot that in. But I'm here to tell you that you can slot us in so many places. You can first tell the real story behind Thanksgiving. I think that the truth of history is important, but also that Veterans Day, talk about us. We're there. We're fighting for you. You're talking any kind of ecological units, anything about empathy and community. It's so great to bring our language to discussion of languages. There's so many other times to bring in an Indigenous storytelling and history than just Thanksgiving or Native American Heritage Month. For all of you out there who do bring this into your classrooms already, and even just watching the chat, I'm so grateful that you're there and that you exist, and that you're bringing this into to kids today, making us less invisible. I have also had students that thought that Indigenous people were extinct. So I am so grateful to you all for doing that. And Katie, did I cover everything? I feel like I might have.
Yeah, we're having a great conversation, Elise. Oh, am I on mute? No.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead.
About the history of Native American Heritage Month. I think that was also
Oh, yes.
first that too.
That began as a week, Native American. It was a Native American, I think, an awareness week originally, and in the 90s, it then became a regular month. It was one of the first heritage months that existed, but this is very modern. The fact that we even have these heritage months, where it's but it's also significant that it was a Native American Heritage Month. It was one of the first heritage months that came about. That in of itself is history. And that's something to say about the month, Oh, it began as a week, became a month.
Um, thank you for Elise for providing that additional context. So it's October 1st, we are all as educators, prepping for, Native American Heritage Month and then the Thanksgiving holiday. Although all of us know and acknowledge that we are teaching Native and Indigenous history year round, these are just part of, our educational system today. So we would love, and as I mentioned before, the chat has been incredible with sharing ideas. How do you plan on approaching Thanksgiving this year? Let us know. What books do you use? How can you use what we discussed today in your own curriculum? Do any of you use The People Shall Continue to Teach Thanksgiving? How would you teach this book with Thanksgiving? So please put it in the chat, and then we'll talk a little bit about your responses. Oh, I also wanted to mention, I'm going to put this in the chat. Giving Thanks is another one of our titles.
Yes.
By Chief Jake Swamp. And so that's also available in Spanish as well. And this one is very accessible. You could use this in a preschool setting. I read this with my 2.5-year-old son. He loves it. So Giving Thanks is a really beautiful book.
I kind of want to encourage teachers out there who are trying to do the right thing. They're yes, heritage months are limited. Yes, Thanksgiving is a limited thing. This is not the be all end all of Indigenous culture. But at least it's something. I will say that thinking of it more along the lines of, let's talk about feast days instead of talking about a mythical story. Let's talk about what feast days really mean. Let's talk about the Wampanoag. Let's talk about them as a people. Can we make this real and make this correct and talk about gratitude in this time? I think that that's important. And I think it's important to realize that not all Indigenous people celebrate Thanksgiving. It's a bloody history. So I think that we need to be thoughtful in that space. But it is an opportunity to not shy away from as well. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
Elise, I remember you and I both read this article in the New York Times. I think it was a few years ago about the Native approach to Thanksgiving. Do you remember what the title of that article?
Oh, the Kapanak. I know I'm going to mispronounce this Wampanoag word, but there's a new book out now with Charles Bridge that does honor Thanksgiving properly. It's a good history book, in my opinion, for a good picture book. It's just coming out. I don't know if that's what you were talking about.
Yes. Family Traditions Today and Using Giving Thanks book from Chief Jake Swamp.
Yes, and Tracy's book, The We Are Grateful, Ojahaliga, this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book.
She also has a pronunciation guide on her website.
Yes.
Which is really critical. Absolutely have that ready to go for when you're reading the book and showing it just and getting
Notebook. One of these days, I'm going to call up Karen Voss over there at Charles Ridge and say, help me, connect me. Let me learn how to say this word right. We all speak different languages.
Teaching is all about teachable moments.
I want to also thank our ASL folks today, man. I'm so honored to have you translate our words. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if someone is asking about the blog, but our blog is blog.leanlow.com. And there is some great Native and Indigenous content on our blog. When you search, there are interviews with Elise and Tracy, and some what we call tea time. There is plenty of content to be had on the blog. So
I saw a little, sorry, Kay, I saw a little, someone was asking about the hand signals. You can literally Google, because I can't do this now and add properly at the space, but you can literally Google like Native American trading sign language and things like that. There are even videos of people doing it, saying words, showing the language. It's a wonderful, fascinating something to go about and do during this time. It's very cool. Kids find it very, very cool.
So
I'm so glad you don't draw pictures of natives and pilgrims. Sorry, Kate. I was just like, yay. Right.
Awesome. So we have a teacher's guide. We have free teacher's guides for all of our almost all of our books on our website. They're free to download. They're flexible. They are not lesson plans, so you can pick and choose whatever elements you need for your classroom. So we have the People Shall Continue teacher's guide, which I completed, and Elise reviewed. We worked on it together. We collaborated. Elise completed the Indian No More teacher's guide. And so at Lee and Low, we also work with on other Native titles. I've worked with Native freelancers, professors on making sure that they are that they're as accurate as they possibly can be. So for the teacher's guide, our teacher's guide are quite lengthy, but they're for a reason, because we provide a lot of background information and context from the book. Many of our books have quite extensive back matters. The People Shall Continue back matter is particularly beautiful, and it was updated to reflect present day when we republished the book. And some activities that I wanted to highlight. In our arts and media section, we have an activity about researching Native writers and illustrators today. I'm sure in the chat, many of you do this already, but it's really great to continue to research Native writers and illustrators, infuse them in your library, talking with your school and public librarian, asking Native writers and illustrators for virtual or physical author visits, having students come up with questions, really just to continuing to add Native titles to your library. Dr. Debbie Reese has I'm sure all of you know about her blog, but she has wonderful resources about activities featuring Native writers and illustrators as well. And then also researching and investigating tribal nations in your school's area. I mean, you all are very well versed in incorporating Native and Indigenous modern history in your curriculum, but really focusing on your school's area, I think is critical. Having students conduct those project-based learning assignments on the tribal nations that are Indigenous to the local area. If nations, what nations were removed from that area, focusing on termination, on the termination era, and then looking up information, of course, on the current tribal government information today. let's see. I'm going to go to the next slide. So anyway, check out our teacher's guide. It's there. It's available and free for you to use. Also, our other Native and Indigenous titles have teacher's guides, and they have plenty of background information that can help to support your teaching even more. We also have Lee and Low Books Native and Indigenous book list. It says pre-K to grade 8, but you can use it really up into college, whatever. And we have quite a list of books for young children and older students as well, for that feature Native and Indigenous titles. So please check out the collection here, and then I'm going to write my email in the chat. Oops. If you or your school are looking to extend your Native and Indigenous title offerings, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help, happy to brainstorm any titles that you're looking for, what your specific needs are for your school. So please, I encourage you to reach out to me. And that leaves us with the perfect amount of time we have about 9 minutes for a question and answer. Elise, sorry, were you about to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna jump in. I want to say thank you, Meredith Dodd. She's been putting in so many wonderful things in the chat today. Yes, the There book by Tommy Orange. She mentioned something about urban. There's so many. I think it's around 70% Indigenous people are living in urban areas, and it's difficult sometimes when, well, we've just been moved around so much, right? Where we originated is not maybe where we are. Maybe we're a remnant of the people that originated in this particular space or whatever, but we are living amongst cities, like even where my nation is in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, it is a checkerboard of different things. It's, at least though, when I go into Oklahoma, it'll say you're entering the Cherokee boundary, you're entering the Choctaw boundary. And when I'm going through New York City, you're not seeing that. You're not seeing these kinds of things, but there doesn't mean that there are not Indigenous people there. In New York, we have a good, million, maybe it's not million, but we have a lot of Indigenous people in New York. And I even found doing this, I met Renee and Bert, and they're in New York. And I'm like, oh my gosh, more, yay. So to kind of keep in mind that it's not just that we have that type of diversity as well, urban and rural, different landscapes, different places.
Thank you, Elise. That's really helpful. Okay, so please put your questions in the chat. I'm going to go through the chat and see if there are any in the beginning that I missed. Let me see. Sorry.
Oh, corn. Thanksgiving. I know that in classrooms, when the fall comes out, there's a lot of things with corn that happens. There are some great Indigenous stories, creation stories that are about corn. I have them in my own nation, and corn in and of itself is something that Indigenous people contributed to the world. I think that it was Indigenous people that created the corn that we have today. So I think that is a wonderful place to dig in for some activities, and I know that in some that there was an activity even at the schools that we have, immersion schools, where we actually are teaching the Cherokee language in Tahlequah, and there were some really great activities where they were creating like corn projects, and so I think that's a nice spot to go when you're talking about fall and the Indigenous contribution to what's on our tables, what we have at Thanksgiving, those stories, especially for younger children.
Elise, that also reminds me, I put in the chat about the webinar information, but Carla Messinger also talks about, she's Lenape, and she talks a lot about corn. And I put in her website, Native American Heritage Programs, and she has quite a lot of resources dedicated to, yeah.
I love it. And, being the food person, understanding what foods the indigenous people have brought about to the world. Tomatoes, you know, you have Italy that is all pizza with tomato sauce. Those tomatoes came from us. This is a great way to show indigenous contributions also by looking at the foods that we have contributed into the zeitgeist of cuisine across the world.
So we have a question. Do you have any books, Leah, from Leah Lowe about the California mission era? I talked about this in Indian No More. We are asked about this constantly. So please, somebody write a picture book and submit it to our New Voices contest.
Or middle grade or YA novel.
Middle grade, yes.
Yes, I'm actually working on creating kind of when a group that can work on this project, working a little bit with NMAI about this, and talking to some people about kind of getting a band of people together to help solve this issue. This is definitely a passion and a priority of mine to work on this issue. I thank you for asking about it.
Elise, that reminds me. So the new
Talks about missions. Oh, sorry.
the new visions. I want to put that in the chat. Let me see. Since I'm sharing my screen, it's hard for me to share. But Elise, did you want to talk a little bit about, before we go, about New Visions?
Certainly. So New Visions, the New Visions Award is an award given to a middle grade or YA novel. It can be nonfiction or fiction, graphic novel or regular novel for BIPOC by BIPOC authors who are just coming up into the publishing industry. So it kind of gives a way for authors who aren't represented to be able to share their work with us. We go through and actually are always so excited to see what we get when our contest opens and closes. We don't always have it every single year, but when we do have it, I do encourage all Indigenous authors or any authors of color out there to submit to us for that award.
Mm-hmm. I put it in the chat so people can see it. I hope you all were able to see it.
And yes, your NMAI has so many resources.
Yes.
They are doing such great things. I want to be best friends with them forever. They're really, really wonderful.
We love you, Renee. Renee has been very active in the chat. So thank you so much, Renee.
Yeah. So I just want to just say thank you to everybody for joining us, and so much to cover in such a little bit of time, but I'm just so happy to see all of you and to see all of what you're doing in your classrooms today. Has been very encouraging for me today. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And please reach out. You can follow us on social media. Like I said earlier, please check out our blog. Lots of resources to be found there. And then you can always reach out to me, Kay Potter at Lee and Low, if you have questions. So thank you, everybody.
Wado. Thank you.